Hey everybody, how you doing today? Welcome back to the Calibrate Tools and DIY channel. Hope everybody's doing fine. All right, guys, we're gonna jump right into it. Catch it on the replay. Um, if you're not here now, but have you guys noticed that trade schools are now becoming more attractive in light of what's going on as far as pursuing a higher education? It's becoming more costly to do that, right? And that's due to the efforts of those in the federal government who want to break up the Department of Education. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. But for those who are not, yeah, it's going to cost a lot more now just to go to school, right? Just to attend that four-year university to pursue your lofty dreams of becoming, say, I don't know, a doctor, or lawyer, or whatever, right? Some of those professional degrees are being canceled, for lack of a better word. And on the surface, these these changes in the Department of Education, um, they look good, right? Especially, and I don't want to advocate for this administration, right? I'm kind of an independent guy, but on the surface of these changes, uh, it, it, it they kind of argue my case for why I started this channel, right? And I'm going to get into why that is. But yeah, if you got kids that are, or even if you are a young person yourself, and you're trying to go to college now, it's just you're gonna need more money to do that, right? Because you can't borrow what you used to be able to borrow because of these changes, and that can be the meaning, or that can mean um, going to pursue a certain degree or pursue a certain career path, or it could mean just changing your trajectory completely and going in another direction because of these changes. So let's dive into the nitty gritty of the changes that are taking place right now or have taken place. All right, so it says the bulk of this stems from what we call the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, also called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Okay, that was signed back in July of last year. No, July of 2025, and it was finalized by the Department of Education, who pretty much they were signing their own death warrant when they, when they did this, the Department of Education. But you'll find out why in a minute. Okay, so basically, it's all about loan um, amounts. Okay, you won't be able to borrow what you used to borrow to go to school, right? For example, they have. I'm going to list a couple of different loan programs that were changed. One is the Grad Plus loans. That those were eliminated for new borrowers. Now, if you were, already borrowing from them from that particular program before July 1st of 2026, you're kind of grandfathered in. You can keep borrowing from that until you finish your current program. Okay. Then there's the new graduate students um, that they will be capped at $20,500 a year, at up to $100,000 in their lifetime. New professional students, that's lawyers, if you're in the medical field or pursuing a career in the medical field, doctors, whatever, they're going to be capped at $50,000 a year, $200,000 lifetime. Now, how much does a medical degree cost? By the way, guys, I didn't even look that up. How much does a medical degree cost? Hold on a second. If you know, let me know in the chat or the comments. How much does a med or does medical school cost? Medical. Uh, let's see here. All right, it says here the total 4-year cost of attendance for medical school in the United States ranges from $297,000, 745, $297,745 at public institutions to $408,150 at private institutions. So, if you don't have any inherited some money from whoever or got some scholarship or something like that, and you're trying to pay your way through medical school with these cuts right now, um, you're not gonna be able to do it. Okay, it says the exact amounts you pay depends heavily on state residency and the type of program you select. Anyway, let's continue here. So you see where I'm going here with that, okay? And then there's another one called the Parent Plus loan. They're going to be capped. Their borrowing amount's going to be capped at $20,000 a year per dependent student, $65,000 lifetime. Previously unlimited. Okay, it was a previously unlimited program, loan program, up to the cost of attendance. Parents already borrowing can keep old terms for up to 3 more years or until the student finishes. Then you have the independent undergrad students. Okay, they now face a $257,000 lifetime cap across all direct loans. Loan amounts get prorated down if a student drops below full time. So you better be going full time, going to school full time. That's 12 credit hours in order for you to even get what they're offering right now. Okay, undergraduate loan limits and Pell Grant amounts, they stay the same, but there are some caveats to that, to those Pell Grants, and I'll get to that in a minute. Okay. Let's see here. What about the repayment schedule? Two new repayment plans launch: the income-driven repayment assistance plan and the tiered standard plan. Okay, so I'm not going to get into details on that. Pell Grant changes. This is one of this matters most for what I'm all about. Okay, this kind of makes it look good. It makes all these changes look good with this right here. Okay, it says students with a student aid index of $14,790 or higher, they will lose Pell Grant eligibility entirely. Okay, now that's not the good part. And students whose other grants and scholarships already cover full cost of attendance are also going to be cut off from the Pell Grants. Okay, now the part that argues my case here for trade school is a new change in the Pell Grant program, and that's called Workforce Pell Grants. That says for the first time, Pell Grants can go to short-term, that's 8 to 15 weeks, job training programs instead of only traditional degree programs. This is meant to let people enter high-skill, high-wage jobs quickly with little or no student debt, and to strengthen the workforce pipeline. Programs need at least a year of operating history and must meet outcome benchmarks like job placement and earnings to qualify. So this part of the whole Pell Grant thing is good, right? It promotes trade. It promotes trade schools, giving people jobs right out of school with very little debt, or very little to no student debt, and it's going to help with that labor shortage that I talk about all the time on my lives and on this channel that's out there, right? Um, all right, so just kind of gave you a little breakdown of what's going on as far as all the loan programs. You kind of get the picture here. You won't be able to borrow what you used to borrow to go to school, and it's going to affect certain programs, like I said, like law degrees, medical degrees, things like that. So if you don't have something to be able to supplement the gap of the cost, between what they're going to give you and the cost of your whatever's going to cost you to complete your degree or get all of that, then you're going to be out of gas. You know what I'm saying? So you got to start thinking, start strategizing. These workforce Pell Grants are going to definitely help in the trade school or the giving people high skilled trades, or at least a foot in the door in the trades and getting them a job quickly without all the having to wait around or possibly not getting the job at all, even if you get a degree. So all right, so it looks like a mixed bag right here, right? But then we get to the Department of Education itself, and I'm not going to get into who heads that, who's running that, and all that stuff. This is not going to be a political discussion here, but it's very interesting what's happening to it and the strategy behind it. So let's look here. It says separately from the loan laws, all right, the ones I just talked about, that were implemented or signed into law on July 1st of 2025. There is an effort to pretty much dismantle, annihilate the Department of Education. Okay, of course, it cannot be done without an act of Congress, but they're still fighting to do this. All right. So it says on March 2025, uh, an executive order directed the administration to close the department to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law. Though the administration itself acknowledges full elimination needs an act of Congress, like I just said. Staff has been cut roughly 40% from 4,100 employees to about 2,800 employees through layoffs and through just regular attrition. Okay, just people leaving. Um, Instead of closing it outright, what it's doing, what's happening is they're offloading the functions, most of the functions of the Department of Education to other agencies. Okay, it says 14 such agreements have been signed since January 2025, transferring core functions to the Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, Department of Labor, Department of Interior, and the Department of State. Most recently, in June 2026, Civil Rights Enforcement moved to the Department of Justice, and Special Education Oversight moved to the Health and Human Services Department. Career and technical education programs moved to the Department of Labor. All right. So they just pretty much took all these responsibilities from the Department of Education and gave it to all these other agencies, which, if you're thinking ahead, it says, okay, what do these other agencies have to do with these particular what the Department of Education had to take care of? Why, right? And you can kind of conjecture that it could be many reasons. It can be some nefarious reasons. It can be some other underhanded reasons, but they give some of the very legitimate reasons on the surface, and that's, to me, I don't want to give anybody any kind of undue kudos, but the reasons behind this, how they delegated the different responsibilities to these other agencies, the reasons that they give on the surface seem logical. It really does make sense in some cases. But then as I get towards the end of this live, I'll show you why that, the breaking up the Department of Education could actually be a dangerous thing. Okay. And I'll get to that in a minute. All right. So Congress has actually blocked funds from being used to relocate all the offices and to reorganize the programs. But the Department of Education, it says, argues that these partnerships with these other agencies, the DOJ, Health and Human Services, Department of Labor, and all that, they don't count as prohibited reorganization. So they're in a fight here, right, as to why this is being done. Okay. So it says critics say, the critics are the educational nonprofits, the Senate Democrats, disability advocates. They argue that the agencies inheriting this work from the Department of Education, they don't have the capacity for it. The reorganization has already raised the costs of certain things, and then it also weakened the protections for students with disabilities and civil rights enforcement. And that's, to me, that's more the dangerous part here, because you have reverberating effects from these changes that that can have lasting impact on certain communities. And you know me, I'm all about my community. Okay, so just because something looks good or maybe so-called makes sense on paper, or whatever arguments you give to to get something done or to get Congress to pass it, doesn't, if you're not reading between the lines, you can see things that don't even have to do with what they say, but there's an agenda. You get what I'm saying? Okay. All right, so it's going to make it harder for graduate students and professional students at the end of the day. Okay, eliminating all of those loan programs that previously gave them more money, that's going to mean obviously a more expensive education. Okay, especially like I said with law school, medical school, and stuff. And as far as just think about it, guys. What that's going to do is that's going to force people to get loans from other non-federal, non-regulated institutions, private institutions. Okay, now these private institutions, they don't have any repayment programs. Okay, they don't have any income-driven repayment programs to say, okay, you come from that income bracket, you only have to pay so much back during a certain time. A private institution, loan institution, they don't have to do any of that stuff. Okay, they don't have to have any forgiveness options. They and uh, and they may even require a credit score that you don't even have to get the loan. All right, so you're just right then and there, it's eliminating a lot of people who had dreams of getting these loans so they can become a doctor or a lawyer or do something, something in that field, in certain fields. Okay, then the Parent Plus cap. Okay, that means families who leaned on that loan to cover a gap can no longer fully close it that way. Okay, especially with private institutions, they're going to cost more too. The Department of Education itself has acknowledged in their rules that some of the graduate programs may shrink or close entirely if schools don't cut tuition or students can't find other funding sources. That's a direct admission that access to some of these programs will go away or will shrink. Okay, so now if you're an undergrad student, you may not feel the effects as much. Okay, it says undergrad Pell and loan limits are unchanged in dollar terms, but the SAI cutoff removes Pell eligibility from some lower middle income students who previously got at least a partial grant. So if you're dropping below a full-time status, like I mentioned before, that's going to possibly cut off your eligibility completely too. Okay, so that's a big risk for students that probably need to work, right? A lot of people work and go to school at the same time. They can't carry a full-time load, right? They got to kind of piecemeal their education along the way until they finish because they got to pay the bills or they got to help family and stuff like that. Well, this right here, that's requiring people to be full-time, that's going to cut them out, right? Because they can't, they're just not going to be qualified due to this. So it makes you ask, hey, what's going on here? Is there an agenda to make America dumber or what? I mean, I don't understand this. In other countries, there's free education, right? Or at least close to it. And over here, you got to pay an arm and a leg just to get an education to possibly get a job, right? So anyway, all right. So the biggest issue here isn't the loan caps themselves. It's the uncertainty, okay? It says litigation is ongoing. Guidance keeps shifting, all right? Let's see here. And the agency administrating all of this is losing staff and handing off its functions to agencies less familiar with the programs. That's the Department of Education, right? They're willingly committing suicide and giving themselves over to these other agencies that may have other agendas. All right. So let's see. Why is trade school getting more attractive? Well, obviously, just this whole how I broke everything down is basically gonna push trade schools to the front, right? Because it looks more attractive because now you don't have to deal with all this stuff. They're not getting affected as much. Once again, I mentioned the workforce Pell Grants. Those are actually helping people go to trade school. Okay, that never existed before. That's brand new. Okay, that's brand new federal money that people can get to go to trade schools. And so, if you're already leaning that direction, this can actually help you. All right. Traditional college just got more expensive to finance, obviously. Career and technical education, that's basically a fancy term for vocational ed. That sits under the Department of Labor, not education. Okay. Now it says those functions were transferred there as part of restructuring. That's a policy signal, not just a funding one. Okay. CTE, that's career and technical education, is being institutionally aligned with workforce employment infrastructure, more so than academic infrastructure. So that can mean more employer connections, right? Employer partnerships. Because once again, I think the strategy behind this is to at least close that labor shortage gap that exists out there right now. And so to me, that's one of the good parts of this. So that's why trade schools are looking more attractive in light of what's going on right now. But let's jump into something that I think, right, may be other unstated agendas behind all the breaking up of the Department of Education. Okay, it goes just beyond the whatever you want to call it, beyond the bureaucracy, beyond the trying to make things more efficient. Um, one of the issues that I think that's going to affect marginalized communities due to these changes is it's going to weaken the civil rights enforcement. Right? I think I briefly mentioned that. Right? The Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, they enforce uh, these what's called Title VI and Title IX. Title VI is race discrimination. Okay, Title IX is sex discrimination. They enforce um, these things in schools. Okay, so if you move the function, this function, if you break up the Department of Education and you take what that's going to do is it's going to weaken the ability to protect students from, once again, race discrimination or any kind of discrimination based on race, gender, and disability. All right, if you move that to the Department of Justice, you don't know what they're going to do with it. Right? They have different priorities and different agendas, so they may not be as strong on people that are violating these things in schools, violating, or being discriminatory in schools, right? So that could be an underhanded way of rolling back these protections that have existed due to the Department of Education, or when those things came into being, the Title VI and Title IX. So you have to understand that there can be underhanded methods, underhanded ways of rolling back rights, okay, and making it look like, oh, this is a logical thing. It makes sense. This is a good thing. All right. Then there's also the whole progressive movement and the DEI movement that has been attacked, right? Pretty much dismantled. Okay. So like on the conservative side, right? You actually see the open attack on these DEI policies, these progressive policies, and so what they do is that they argue, these conservatives, they argue that the Department of Education, the one that's been broken up, all right, or at least is in the process of being broken up, they promote all this gender ideology. They promote CRT, which is critical race theory, and dismantling the Department of Education is actually like dropping a bomb on their arch enemies, which are those two things I just mentioned, to the conservative. Okay, so once again, right? If you read between the lines and don't just take things at face value and say, oh, that's great, that looks good. You see that there can be other agendas going on. Okay, and if you don't study what's going on in the federal government, once again, Project 2025, they have their own agenda as well. So they could be behind this whole thing, which I'm sure they are. And I don't want to get, like I said, I don't want this to be a political discussion, but sometimes the political world and the everything kind of intersects, and you can't not but at least highlight how politics can play a role in all of these things and how it can affect you in the long run. All right, so another big thing is once again, if you're cutting back the ability for students to borrow money to go to school and saying, okay, you're going to have to make up the difference. Well, where they're going to make the differences up at, right? They're going to probably have to go to a private institution to get money, like I mentioned earlier. So you're basically privatizing the student loan, right? And so a lot of people are saying that the 1.6, I think it's 1.7 trillion dollars in student debt that exists out there. Yes, that's going to benefit these private lenders, right? Or investors or whoever. It could be hedge funds behind these things. Who knows, right? So that's another way of just ramming it through to the student, or right, get basically enslaving them once again, because they could put interest terms on those loans. They can, they don't have to have any forgiveness. Like I mentioned before, they don't have to, they can require all kinds of things out of you that you just don't have. So it's just going to make it worse for you, right? So what else? Okay, starving public schools to boost vouchers and school choice. All right, that's kind of related to what I was saying about privatizing student debt. Okay, so let's see here. Critics tie this to a long-standing push, okay, also part of Project 2025, to redirect public education funding towards private school vouchers and homeschooling, on the theory that a diminished Department of Education, a broken up, annihilated Department of Education, means less federal muscle behind public school funding formulas and more state discretion to redirect money. All right. Political symbolism over substance. Some observers note the move carries heavy symbolic value for a conservative base that has wanted to eliminate the Department of Education since Reagan, and that a chunk of the push is about fulfilling a decades-old campaign promise rather than a carefully reasoned policy overhaul. Okay? And that basically saying that they're trying to fulfill something that they wanted to do a long time ago, okay, versus what they put in front of you, right? That carefully seasoned policy overhaul and all the reasons they give for it. They have another agenda. One moderate assessment argues both sides have exaggerated the real world impact, since Congress has repeatedly rejected the deepest proposed cuts and some layoffs were reversed by courts. All right. In conclusion here, supporters, okay, I'm not going to name names, argued this isn't about any of the above. Their case is that decades of federal spending and mandates have not improved outcomes, and that money and decision making should sit closer to classrooms and states rather than Washington bureaucracy. Some conservative commentators argue essential services, that's loans, Pell, and something called IDA, aren't being eliminated, only relocated to agencies better suited to run them. And that's what's actually being cut, is the administrative overhead, not the services themselves. Okay? This is generally contested active political territory. The suspect motivations framing above reflects what critics allege, not a settled factual record of intent, and a reasonable people land very differently on which of these reasons readings is accurate. So you can figure it however you want to figure it. I gave you my synopsis on it. Coming from my community, I may be biased based on my, understanding the plight and the challenges of my own community, right? So if you're going to make it harder for people in my community to go to school and get a degree, if you're gonna, that's not a good thing. But if you're gonna make it easier for them to go to trade school, right? And that's another side of me that, hey, I'll root for that all day, right? But then there's other overarching issues that I'm always going to be on the side of, and that's civil rights enforcement. That has nothing to do with tools, trades, nothing like whatever, college. That's just basic human rights. And if that's being threatened by these changes, by breaking up the Department of Education, then yeah, I have an issue with that. So you can see it's a mixed bag. It's the way they did it and the reasons behind it. You don't even know if it's really going to help, right? The things that look good in these changes, the things that look good in these changes, you don't know if it's really going to help. If they enforce the trade school thing, right, make it easier for people to do that with the workforce Pell Grants, that's the only thing out of this that I see is good. Okay? So anyway, guys, tell me what you think in the comments. And all right, let's see here. Around 350K. Hey, love you lives. Hey, okay. Perryville Life knows Perryville vocational schools are here too, yes. Possibly get a job with college education is definitely a challenge. Yes, it is. Like I said, if you have to work and go to school, this is not going to be good for you, right? You're relying on those Pell Grants it's not going to be a good thing. But yeah, so we're just gonna have to do what we got to do, right? All right, guys, I appreciate you. Leave your comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to learn the skill. Nobody can take that away from you. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.